What's up, everyone? I'm super excited to bring you guys what is literally the most fun and powerful build I've ever played in Diablo 4, Crushing Storm. If you've ever wanted to be a flying gorilla ninja warrior with infinite evades, unlimited ult charges, infinite vulnerability, resettable cooldowns, insane damage, and incredible survivability, this was made for you. With this build, I was able to solo push Pit 50 and unlock Torment 3 at only Paragon level 115, and then a few hours after that, I was able to push Pit 65 and unlock Torment 4 at Paragon 152. Now here's why that's important and how a powerful build like this can really accelerate your progression. I cleared Pit 50 and unlocked Torment 3 with item level 750 gear and no masterworking yet. This is important because item level 800 ancestral gear with greater affixes seem to drop way more often in Torment 3. So if you can find a build powerful enough to farm Torment 3 without having to masterwork, you can save all your masterworking materials for when you find those first couple item level 800 ancestrals with GAs, then instantly use the materials you saved to juice them up with masterworking. Within a couple hours of doing the normal activities in Torment 3, I had a full set of GA Dex ancestral items for all of my legendaries. I then used all the masterworking materials I had saved to bring all this new gear up to Masterwork 4, and with that newfound power, I was able to instantly go back into the pit and push level 65 to unlock Torment 4. And now I'm farming Torment 4, which has the best loot in the game, while still being just over Paragon 150. This build is the next evolution of our Infinite Evade Feathers build that I've been playing since we figured it out a few hours into day one. If you're looking for a very powerful leveling build or early endgame build, check out the previous two guides that led up to this one, which are Flying Jaguar and Infinite Storm Feathers, and I will link both of those in the description. This build again centers around Eagle as our primary spirit, combined with Aspect of Exhilaration, which will give us unlimited evade charges. Every time we evade, we shoot out very powerful feathers that deal big damage, pierce, and make everything vulnerable. With Aspect of Exhilaration, every time we hit vulnerable enemies, we have a chance to reset our evade. So with these two together, we have an incredibly tight feedback loop where evading shoots feathers and makes everything vulnerable, and then those same feathers that are hitting the vulnerable targets reset the evade. So evading shoots feathers and feathers reset evade. We're now combining this idea with the power of the gorilla. In between our evades, we're going to be smashing everything into the ground with Crushing Fist, as well as punching it square in the face with Payback. These abilities ended up having some beautiful synergy with this build, and they really just made the flow of combat feel so good, where you're sort of just cartwheel flipping over everything with lightning feathers flying everywhere, and then slamming it into the ground every time you land. The idea for this came from getting my first Harmony of Ebawaka, one of the new unique helms available to Spiritborn. This has a super cool effect of making your secondary Spirit Hall choice apply its skill tag along with your primary spirit to all of your abilities. And then it gives your abilities a damage multiplier based on how many tags they have from spirit animals. In this build, we're rocking Jaguar as our secondary Spirit Hall, which will be our main and only source of ferocity generation. What this does is it turns Crushing Fist, Payback, Toxic Skin, and the Seeker into Jaguar skills, and our primary Spirit Hall of Eagle turns Crushing Fist, Payback, Toxic Skin, Ravager, and Counterattack into Eagle skills. Now, Crushing Fist and Payback have 3 spirit animals attached: Gorilla, Eagle, and Jaguar. Since we get 30% multiplicative for each spirit, those abilities are now at a 90% multiplicative damage increase. Our Toxic Skin is also at 90%, and our Ravager, Seeker, and Counterattack are at 60%. The other very important thing this does is let all of our abilities use the passives from the other spirits in the skill tree. So now, all of our skills will be benefiting from 18% multiplicative damage from Brilliance, 30% multiplicative damage from Acceleration, 30% multiplicative from Potent, and our crits get an extra 12% on top of all that from Furnace. Defensively, we have absolutely mega dodge and survivability in this build, in a big part due to the Mirage passive in our skill tree. Fully ranked, this gives us plus 60% dodge while evading, and since we're literally constantly evading in this build, we will automatically be dodging a ton of attacks. With Counterattack, every single attack we dodge automatically hits back for 80% weapon damage. Now, Crushing Hand is special because it's a core skill that has barrier generation. So every Crushing Hand we cast will give us 10% of that damage as a barrier, up to 30% of our max life. Because we're dodging so much and casting Crushing Hand constantly between evades, this lets us have very high uptime on the barrier effect. We're using this to leverage one of the biggest offensive multipliers available to Spiritborn in their aspects, which is Conceited. So rocking Conceited Aspect will give all our damage an extra 30% multiplicative whenever we have a barrier up from Crushing Hands, which is most of the time. With Gorilla, we're also leveraging this new aspect of unyielding hits, which makes it so whenever we cast a Gorilla skill, some percentage of our armor value is added to our base weapon damage, raising our damage floor. To round out our multiplier stack, we're also using Aspect of Elements, giving us another 35% multiplicative damage. And the way you want to think about this one, since it rotates through elements, it's affecting half your damage half the time. So we can consider this 35% multiplier active half the time to be about as effective as a 17.5% multiplier, which is just half of 35%, active all the time. Finally, we're using Aspect of Falling Feathers as our increased weapon aspect, which creates lightning feathers that fall behind us every time we dash. With our constant flipping back and forth over stuff while smashing it into the ground, this aspect is perfect to give us extra damage from those lightning feathers falling on top of everything we evade over. Now, one of the most important skills we have to make this build function properly that may not be super obvious is Toxic Skin. This is because of the interaction it has with Aspect of Exhilaration. You'll find that the more stuff you have poisoned with its passive or active effect, the more dash resets you'll get from Exhilaration. When evolving this build, I tried dropping this for something else and it completely breaks the feeling of infinite evade feathers. We can also constantly reset Toxic Skin to have it active 100% of the time through our ultimate, the Seeker. The Seeker is super special and powerful because it is the only ultimate in the game with charges, making it incredibly reliable to use with very high uptime. Through the use of Flicker Step as our boots, we're literally going to have infinite Seeker charges and we'll be able to use it instantly every 4 seconds. Now, what makes it even more insane is all the passive skills that Spiritborn have when we cast an ult. Through the use of these passives, now every time we cast the Seeker, we get 6 seconds of Unstoppable, so we can now use it to break crowd control and activate 12% damage multiplier from Unrestrained Power. We get 15% multiplicative damage against elites, doubled to 30% against bosses. We get another 30% multiplicative on all damage from Supremacy. Hitting enemies with it heals us. Our max vigor is increased by 10. And most importantly, upon casting our ultimate, it resets the cooldown of whatever skill we used before it through Intricacy. We can now literally use our Seeker charges to reset our abilities. If played correctly in the right situations, this will let us keep 100% uptime on the active effects of Ravager, Counterattack, and Toxic Skin all at the same time. On top of all of this, the Seeker knocks everything down to crowd control it, makes it all vulnerable, and then hits it again for 300% weapon damage, which is a guaranteed crit. My Eagles are already overpowering for like 4.5 million. For all these reasons, the Seeker is now the best ultimate in the game, hands down. Alright, so we already have our max ferocity stacks covered because we have Jaguar as our secondary spirit, so we'll always be automatically benefiting from max increased attack speed. But what about our resolve? I found a really cool interaction to get unlimited resolve in this build, which is a combo of an aspect and a rune word. The rune word I've been running with infinite feathers since the very beginning is Sem Lum. These are starter runes you get very early on, but with infinite evade they give us incredibly powerful vigor generation. And this rune word basically carries all our vigor gen by itself. We're combining this with the new aspect of tenacity on chest, which gives us a stack of resolve for every 10 vigor we generate over 100. Because we're generating so much vigor from dashing with the Semlum rune word, this aspect will basically give us permanent full stacks of resolve, resulting in 20% damage reduction active all the time. If you're playing solo, you'll want to combine this with our first mercenary buddy Rahir, who is actually incredibly useful for this build. On top of our already crazy defensive stack, Rahir will also give us free access to Fortify, which we can't get any other way. Since we're already taking so little damage from constantly dodging and having barriers up, this Fortify will fairly quickly build to 100% as he shield charges. He's also giving us plus 15% armor to help us scale difficulties, 20% damage reduction from his taunt, and a 15% multiplier to everything that's been taunted. Most importantly though, every 30 seconds, he will completely negate any significant damage done to us, which gives us inherent one-shot protection. And this has already saved me many times from random one-shots, especially like boss echoes, because if you're hit with an echo while this is off cooldown, he'll actually step in and absorb not just the damage, but also the echo stack. To further our invincibility, we are running Moni Mott for our second rune word. This will make it so every time we cast a skill after moving, which is literally every skill we cast in this build, it will generate a Rogue's Dark Shadow. Each shadow gives us 8% damage reduction, stacking up to 5 times for a total of 40%. Now, Mott is a special rune because unlike almost all the other invocation runes, where the effect is triggered, happens, and then it's gone, Mott stays with you. Every shadow you generate from triggering Moni will permanently stay with you until it's knocked off by taking damage. Because we're dodging like crazy with constant barriers, it takes a lot for these to get knocked off. and with the amount of skills we're casting while moving, any that do get knocked off will almost instantly be generated back again. This lets us carry a reliable 40% damage reduction everywhere we go in Sanctuary. Alright, now let's talk about how to play it. This build is a bit more involved in its rotation than most builds, but in a very fun and interesting way, and this is really part of the reason I'm so in love with it. It has such insane mobility and damage, and it's all happening so fast with the animation so smooth that you literally just feel like a flying ninja gladiator. The first and main thing we want to always be doing is evading. The most important thing to remember here is you actually need to hit your feathers to get the evade reset from Exhilaration. If your feathers aren't connecting, your infinite evade goes away. With Flicker Step and Aspect of Falling Feathers, we want to prioritize evading directly through enemies. This is what will give our Eagle ult infinite charges. Every time we evade, we're also getting that 60% dodge chance and 15% crit chance from Mirage. This ends up looking like a pattern of constantly evading back and forth, back and forth. Not only will this proc Flicker Step, but it will also maximize the cleave of your feathers from Eagle Spirit, as well as the amount of damage coming from the falling lightning feathers that follow your evade. After almost every evade, you'll want to quickly smash something into the ground with Crushing Hand before dashing again. This will activate your Gorilla weapon damage from unyielding hits as well as stack your barrier. In this build, we can treat Payback almost like a basic attack with utility, kind of like a generator with a cooldown. We want to use it as soon as it's off cooldown because with Invasive Payback, once it's on cooldown, it acts as a free CC break. Anytime you get crowd controlled with Payback on cooldown, it will absorb the crowd control, instantly come off cooldown, become free to cast, and grant you unstoppable for 5 seconds. So after every evade back and forth, look to cast Crushing Hand unless Payback is off cooldown, then weave that in real quick. Watch for Payback to proc off crowd control because when it does, you can just spam its damage for free for a couple seconds. Alright, so that's our first two abilities combined with Evade, and this is our primary rotation. Now, we need to use our other 4 abilities to support and enhance this rotation. We have 3 incarnate skills, which are Ravager, Counterattack, and Toxic Skin, as well as our Eagle ult, the Seeker. We can think of all of these abilities as sort of being in their own group and synergizing very well together. Our goal is to have 100% uptime on the active effects of our incarnate skills while having them active all at the same time, which when played correctly in the right situations is very possible with this build. Here's how it works. With the Intricacy passive from our skill tree, casting our ult will reset the cooldown of whatever we cast right before it. So if we want to reset Ravager, we cast Ravager followed directly by ult. Same thing if we want to reset Counterattack or Toxic Skin. We cast them and then use the Seeker directly after. Now this also works with Payback, but it can only be active on one ability at a time, and so generally we want to use this reset for our incarnates since we're already getting an automatic reset and free cast on Payback from the Invasive upgrade. Alright, so here's how we actually do this in practice to maximize our DPS. Right at the beginning of a fight, cast Ravager and then ult. This will activate the Ravager effect, then instantly reset its cooldown so that it's ready to press again once it runs out. The cool thing about Ravager is that kills extend its effect, so if you're mobbing through stuff quickly, it will literally just stay permanently active from that very first cast. But now, you already have it off cooldown just in case it runs out from casting Eagle right after it. Follow this by mashing your counterattack charges, which will stack time-wise, so with 4 to 6 charges, you'll get over 10 seconds of guaranteed dodges. It takes the Seeker Eagle 4 seconds to land and take off again, so as soon as it's taking off from that first cast, we want to activate Toxic Skin and then ult again. This will turn on our Poison Ground and instantly reset Toxic Skin's cooldown so we can use it again right when it runs out. Besides trying to keep Ravager active, Toxic Skin is the main incarnate skill we want to try to reset with Eagle. This is what's going to have the biggest effect on your evade resets from Exhilaration, and the more evade resets you get, the faster you can evade. The faster you can evade, the more feathers you will shoot out, which is a core part of our DPS. So once you activate Toxic Skin and call down another Eagle, begin the primary rotation we talked about of constantly dashing through everything and punching on each side of the dash. In certain situations with big enough groups, especially while you have Toxic Skin and Ravager active already, you can just turn into a feather rocket and spam evade over and over and over again, back and forth as fast as you can. I think this is actually our maximum DPS burst window, but it's not possible to maintain this all the time, so it needs to be supported by our other skills and rotations in between. Once you have Ravager and Toxic Skin active, you can also use the ult to reset Counterattack, but I've felt that this one is not super necessary most of the time. Especially with a ring temper that gives us extra charges, we usually already have Counterattack available whenever we need it. In certain defensive situations, it can be useful to reset it with ult because it will literally give us infinite 100% dodge against direct attacks. And how you'd want to do that is use all the charges at once, which will stack the timer, then ult, which will give you back all your charges, then immediately smash them all again to max out the timer and begin the cooldown. You'll find that if you're playing this build not really paying attention, just mashing buttons, your Seeker will be resetting counterattack a lot because it's the incarnate skill that is off cooldown the most often with its charges. Like I said though, you generally don't need this extra dodge except for in really spicy situations, so in general you want to be a bit more intentional with your Eagle resets and really try to use them on Ravager and Toxic Skin. If you had to pick one to always keep up, Toxic Skin would be the play. So at the start of every fight, cast Ravager followed instantly with Eagle to reset it, mash all your counterattack charges while that Eagle is down, then cast Toxic Skin and Eagle again right after it takes off. From here, prioritize using Eagle every 6 seconds ago with Toxic Skin right before to keep 100% uptime on your poison and also to give you that 6 seconds of unstoppable every time you cast it. If you're killing stuff with your Ravager, it will just stay active from that, and the main time we want to rotate Eagle away from Toxic Skin is to get Ravager active again. Alright, to close out, let's quickly go over the most important aspects of our gear, which at this point in the game are armor and resistance. With the changes to difficulty scaling, every jump we make in Torment tiers will result in negative 250 armor and negative 25% resistance, so in order to hit our defensive caps in Torment 4, we need to double the amount we would normally need, which is now 2000 total armor and 200% total resistances. As we get to level 60 and begin to progress into Torment, we want to constantly be trying to stack our armor and resistances to further our push. You'll notice a completely insane difference in the amount of damage you take when you are armor and resistance capped versus when you are not. So if you want to push Torment tiers early like I show here, capping armor and resistance before each jump is absolutely crucial. In my experience, armor cap makes the most difference in the amount of damage we take, so I always prioritize armor cap first and then resistances right after. Our primary armor strategy is to get a percent total armor roll on an amulet and then temper that same amulet with another percent increase to armor. We then combine that with an armor affix roll on chest to give us huge armor scaling. Look for a chest piece with dex and max life, then re-roll the third affix to armor at the enchanter. We can also temper this with percent armor if we're still short, but we may want to save our chest defensive temper for a specific elemental resistance, which we'll talk about in a sec. Slot skulls in your jewelry, which will now be increased by all these percentages. If you're still short after all this, temporarily imprint your chest with Aspect of Disobedience, and this will scale it by another 40% during combat. Note that this isn't going to show in town though. When you enter each difficulty, you'll need to be just over 1000 armor to be capped, and this equates to 1250 total armor in Torment 1, 1500 armor in Torment 2, 1750 armor in Torment 3, and 2000 armor in Torment 4. Keep in mind that if you're playing solo, we can also get an extra plus 15% increase to armor from our buddy Rahir the Mercenary, but keep in mind that this will only show up in your stats when you're not in town, so make sure you walk out into the wilderness real quick if you're trying to calculate this in. Now, alongside our armor strategy, our resistance strategy is basically to get a single roll for each different type of elemental resistance somewhere in our gear affixes and tempers. If you check the build planner and hover over the gear, you'll get an idea of what I mean. An easy way to do this, if you don't have any of these rolls already, is to take the lowest prio affix on your different pieces of gear and try to re-roll them with enchanting to get a type of elemental resistance. Keep in mind that we won't need a lightning roll as we already have this on Flicker Step. So we're looking for 1 fire, 1 cold, 1 shadow, and 1 poison. Any of these that you aren't able to get through normal affixes, you can look to try to get from defensive tempers. However, with our uniques and our percent to armor roll and amulet, the only slot available to do defensive tempers is our chest piece. If you find your armor is good, you can also roll a percent to elemental resistance temper on your amulet instead of that additional percent armor increase. If there's 1 or 2 types of resistances we just can't find rolls for, we go to the last resort of using gems for that specific type of resistance in our jewelry. You'll see in my gear shown at the end that I just could not get a roll for shadow, so one of my rings has an amethyst for 40% extra shadow resist. You basically want to think of your jewelry sockets as your armor and resistance utility belt. You can quickly and easily swap these constantly based on what you need most at the time. If your armor is good but your all resist is low, slot in a couple diamonds. If you need just a bit more armor to get to cap, slot in a single skull. If all your resists are good but you just can't find a roll for poison anywhere, slot in an emerald for that extra poison resist. We're also supplementing all of our resistances with the unique pants, Tassets of Dawning Sky, which have become an extremely powerful unique for this phase of the game as we're trying to climb difficulties. In addition to this, our Paragon board pathing is optimized for early extra armor and resistance through infighting as our first board. Boom, that's it for this one. I hope you guys found it useful. I'm going to show all my gear and the setup at the end here for what I used in this video, but for an updated view of all the information, you really want to use the build planner, because what I show at the end here is just what I used in this footage, but a few little things have already changed, and anything that changes in the future based on patches and such will be reflected in the planner. And that build planner is on Mobalytics, and it's linked in the description. I hope you enjoyed the build and found it useful. I'm going to be continuing to evolve this into a bunch of different crazy builds. There's just so much potential with Spiritborn that we have almost like unlimited ideas at this point. So I'm going to be riding this wave. Don't worry, my Sorcerer friends, I'll still be playing Sorcerer. I'm just really, having so much fun on Spiritborn right now that I'm going to sort of ride this wave for a little bit while I figure out a bunch of really cool builds, and then we'll jump back and start mixing in all the Sorcerer stuff again. Don't forget to like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you're looking for more cool build guides. And if you have any friends that are playing Spiritborn, sharing the build is super helpful for me and getting the algorithm to suggest it more. And yeah, if you have any questions or have any suggestions or things you've tried that you want me to maybe take a look at or consider for this build, or if you've tried the build and want to let me know how it's feeling, I would love to see all that stuff in the comments. So appreciate you a ton. Thank you for watching. Remember to take care of yourself, and I'll see you out there. Peace.
You invite the wrath of not one, but thousands. Thank you.